Hey everybody, welcome to another special Tuesday edition of Mythic Monday, where we take a look at Mythic Plus through the eyes of healers. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the forming healer meta for Dragonflight Season 2, the ever-changing dungeon difficulty tier list, the potential affixes for next week, and the random thought of the week. Let's get into this gearing system. So, let's do it. Let's start with the healing meta. Here are the sub-creation tier lists for both week 1 and week 2 of season 2. No real big changes here. We all pretty much knew Shaman was going to be our top healer in season 2, and it's delivered in that department with great healing throughput, lots of damage, and amazing utility. As an enjoyer of all three of the B tier specs, Disc, Preservation, and Resto Druid, I can confirm they all feel good, they feel strong, they feel unique in their own way. I think we've got a pretty balanced healer meta on our hands, guys. And before you point way down to the F tier at Holy Priest, we always have to remember that Priest players most often head toward whichever of the two specs is performing better in M+, meaning the other healing spec, in this case Holy, is criminally underrepresented. While I don't think Holy Priest is particularly great, I'd say it's a lot closer to Mistweaver and Holy Paladin than this graphic suggests. Probably D tier, maybe the back of C, but still viable. Keep in mind it is still very early in the season and that many players are more focused on raid than M+ currently, which likely fudges the numbers a bit in favor of stronger raid specs. We also have hotfixes coming at us left and right, both to dungeons and specs themselves, and I'd say it's quite likely this could look totally different next week. More so than any point in Dragonflight, I'd say any healer is going to be viable up to a really high threshold at the moment. Dungeon difficulty is super interesting right now. There's a lot to consider when comparing last week to this week. Tyrannical to Fortified is of course a big change, but there's been a lot of dungeon tuning and players have had a ton more time to get used to dungeon mechanics than they did the first week. Last week I predicted that Fortified was going to be really tricky, but in my own experience, the dungeon nerfs plus the overall familiarity players have gained for these dungeons made this week feel a lot easier actually, in many of the dungeons anyway. So let's look at the specifics. This again is the sub-creation dungeon difficulty tier list. Underrot is looking like your golden push key of the season. As you can see here, this Clown Fiesta pug group I was in with like 21 deaths had no trouble timing this dungeon on a +20. To be fair, they were an awesome group of pals. It was just getting a little late for all of us. Anyway, the timer in this place just feels really generous, as does the tuning overall, and this will likely act as our seasonal Shadowmoon Burial Grounds key, where you can time it at least a key level higher than you can anything else. Man, not many people had Brackenhide Hollow as an A-tier easy dungeon back before Season 2 was released, but here we are. Repeated nerfs have really taken the teeth out of most of the difficult parts of this place, and from a healer perspective, there's not a lot to be afraid in here anymore, with the possible exception of Gash Frenzy on Tyrannical Week on the first boss. The last boss went from insanely hard to kind of a joke given her nerf after week 1, and now Brackenhide just feels like a Knoll slaughtering good time for the most part, and it's one of my favorite keys of the season so far. So all by itself in the B tier, we've got Freehold. This is one I actually thought felt a good deal more difficult on Fortified than Tyrannical, at least in the pugs I was running with, where trash mechanics were quite unforgiving, if not dealt with properly, and butt pulls were all the rage. I'm wondering how much of Freehold's easiness comes from the familiarity from the player base. BFA was not that long ago, so it hasn't really been that long since a lot of us ran this place over and over and over again, all expansion long. Bolstering also definitely played a role in here, as allowing certain mobs to get bolstered would make life an absolute struggle for your group. Next in the C tier, we have Neltharian's Lair, Oldemon, and Halls of Infusion. I think NL is going to be one of those dungeons that feels a lot easier on Fortified than Tyrannical, with the biggest pitfall probably being getting unlucky with avalanches. Not too much from the other trash felt too bad, and from a healer perspective with the toned down Fortified bosses, this place felt 1000% easier than it did week 1, combined with numerous hotfixes since then as well, of course. My earliest impressions of Oldemon were that it felt like a fairly easy dungeon, but as key levels go up, it definitely scales more toward being kind of tough. There are definitely some potentially scary moments on trash in here, and a Mass Dispel feels almost mandatory in this dungeon. On top of that, this is another dungeon where bosses pose quite a threat, even on a fortified week. I'd expect this one to be on the harder side of average on both Fort and Tyran weeks, unless some kind of hotfixes come its way, most likely to the 3rd and 4th bosses. I thought Halls of Infusion would be tough on a fortified week, and I actually feel like it was just a few hotfixes that saved this place from being much lower on the list. Even still, some of the trash in here slaps, both right at the beginning of the dungeon as well as leading up to the 3rd boss. Poison Dispel is extremely nice to have here, and Mass Dispel also makes life easier in a few spots. Kind of a tedious dungeon, to be honest, and one of my least favorite of the expansion so far. I wouldn't be surprised if this continues to be harder on fortified than Tyrannical weeks. Vortex Pinnacle is also trending toward being one of the tougher dungeons on both Fort and Tyran weeks. There's quite a few dangerous mobs in here on Fortified, and from a healer point of view, the 2nd boss is an absolute pain with so much ticking damage and movement. Can I just say I'm not a fan of this, hey, this boss just ticks random damage forever mechanic we've seen in a couple places this season. It feels lazy, like Blizzard forgot to give healers something to do and just kind of tossed it in at the end. Finally, Neltharis, even on Fortified. My personal experience in this place is that it's a boss issue. Healer bias here, but the Forge Master boss is a little overtuned still in my opinion. Go ahead and comment on the video your highest HPS you've needed to throw down to make it past this guy. Let's see those big numbers, people. So Blizzard has continued to be secretive about the affix calendar this season, and although they have not been adverse to repeating affixes shortly after we've seen them, let's just play Process of Elimination real quick. At level 7, we still haven't seen Volcanic, Afflicted, or Incorporeal, and I'd really like to take a shot at another one of the new ones. I felt like Entangling was a less annoying version of Quaking, and I like that you could pretty easily cheese it on a lot of specs instead of being forced to deal with it every single time. Yep. Resto Druid main here. At level 14, we've yet to see Spiteful, Bursting, or Sanguine, all of which we're already familiar with, and none of which are particularly ruinous to an entire week of M+. I feel like Spiteful would pair really poorly with Incorporeal or Afflicted because that's just a lot of ads, so I'm going to guess something like Sanguine Afflicted this week. Just take that with a grain of salt, as last week I was totally wrong. Overall, I'm liking that affixes are taking more of a back seat this season. I'd much rather engage with the mechanics of a dungeon than have the limiting factor of a key be the affixes. So far, I'm liking the spot they're in, so I'm looking forward to getting a look at the last 2 new ones. Finally, the random thought of the week, the new gear upgrading system. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm guilty of making fun of this system a bit on stream and how convoluted all the different currencies are, and I do think they should think of some way to streamline it a little bit if they decide to stick with it moving forward, but I'm not gonna deny the awesomeness of this system anymore. In fact, for me, the limiting factor has not really been the currency to upgrade gear with, but obtaining the gear to use my currency on. It makes looting the chests at the end of a key a lot more exciting, knowing that you might be upgrading something to max right then and there, rather than waiting 3 weeks of Valor caps to rank it all the way up. Really curious to hear from you guys in the comments, your thoughts on the new gearing system. Alright, another Mythic Monday in the books, everybody. So as always, love to hear from you guys. What do you think about the healer meta, the dungeon difficulty, the new affixes, the new gearing system? If you made it this far in the video and you didn't fall asleep, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, really helps me out. You can hit subscribe to see more of my content in the future, and check out my live stream right here on YouTube, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 9 p.m. Pacific. We have lots of fun playing all different kinds of healers in Mythic Plus. Hope to see you there sometime, and until next time, happy healing.